Down the Dark Lane, 3 Thrillers from the Motel by Ned Dahan, the audiobook, made available on BlackBoxOnlineRadio. Please consider supporting this channel at BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNed88. There's a link in the description box. The Open Road Shall Decide. Chapter 4. The Day Violet Died. "Mandy, Mandy, come quick," said Violet. Mandy's ears perked up, and she gazed at the cheerful face of Violet Nichols, her best friend, the friend she had known before the week of rage. Mandy gave a sigh of relief. Something had been bothering her. Whatever it was had now subsided. "Hey, what is it?" Mandy asked. Mandy wasn't showing it outward, but she was so excited she could almost hug Violet so tightly that she'd twist her and then pop her head like a circus balloon. "You have to come outside," Violet almost chanted. "What's outside?" Mandy inquired. "That's why you have to come," Violet chirped. "Come see for yourself." Violet grabbed Mandy by the hand. They ran past the pool table with the seafoam green felt and black edges, and out the door with the black frame. Even during everything, Mandy thought it was so odd that she kept thinking about the seafoam green color. It was so odd for a pool table. Violet led Mandy outside and onto the dusty ground of Nevada. Violet began to run, and Mandy followed, hand in hand. "Hey, where are we going?" Mandy asked. The sudden charm and glee of watching Violet returning to her well-composed state was starting to wear off. Violet still seemed non-threatening, but Mandy wasn't sure what to think now. Something was starting to feel off about her. She wasn't sure. Violet was holding her hand, and she could feel the rocks and dirt and sand crunch under her soles as she ran. It was almost as if she was being a little kid again. At least, that is what Mandy tried to tell herself. "It's on the other side of this hill," Violet exclaimed. They were well out of Violet's backyard and onto the edge of civilization. Mandy looked out, and all she could see were the familiar peaks that surrounded Reno. They looked far less appealing now than they did before. As they approached the sandy and grassy mount, Mandy saw a little young creature on the other side of the hill. Violet stopped running, but her hand still clasped around Mandy's, almost too tightly. "It's a deer," Mandy muttered. "It's a mule deer," Violet specified. "Now come on, Amanda. You have lived all your life here. I would expect you to address it by its proper name. They are everywhere." It sounded so strange to hear Violet call her anything other than Mandy. "It's injured," Mandy observed. "Its leg is broken," Violet specified again. "Amanda, you have to be more precise with your language. This is one of the reasons why people other than me dislike you so much." Mandy knew what was happening. She didn't want to believe it, but she did. The evil presence was returning to Violet. Mandy couldn't tell exactly how, but Violet seemed gentle and non-threatening. Yet she still seemed like the friend she had before, but her choice of words reminded Mandy of Violet's two-faced, sinister side. "We should tell someone," Mandy murmured. "Tell someone what? Who? How?" Violet questioned her. "Go ahead, call someone." "I don't have my phone," said Mandy. "I left it back in the game room." "I know," said Violet in return. "I saw it on the edge of the pool table. You always were so forgetful, Amanda. It is a shame. Now, because of you, you won't be able to save that poor little mule deer." "Why are you talking like that?" Mandy shouted. "This whole week you've been really weird and mean." "And mean," Violet laughed in a different tone. "Amanda, my dearest friend, my best friend, you are such a little weakling." The voice didn't even have a sound that resembled Violet's at this point. Mandy had no idea what was happening. It was as if a different persona was residing in her, a persona of evil. "You never acted like this at school," Mandy almost stuttered. "And you didn't when your parents are around. Only with me. Why are you being like this to me? You're my best friend. All I want is for things to go back to the way they used to be. We were real best friends. Birthday parties, going on vacation, talking about your crush on Jordan Radcliffe." Violet eased up. Yeah, we are best friends, she said in the sweetest voice ever. Then let's stay that way. Look, Amanda, you don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that person. I want things to be like before, too. But there is something you have to do for me. Let me know that you're my best friend. Just tell me, Vi, Mandy begged. Look, we have been through so much together. I know something has been bothering you, so do something for me, Violet repeated. She reached into the front pocket of her light-colored blue jean shorts and pulled out a folding knife. Mandy had seen this one before. It was her father's fishing knife. All she knew was that her father had kept it in his tackle box. The knife was golden with a wooden piece in the middle, on each side, but when Violet clicked the blade open, the blade looked like pure silver. Kill it, Violet instructed. Violet, Mandy hesitated. Kill the deer, she said once more. Her voice didn't sound like Violet's harsh side, but the act that Violet had put on for Mandy was fading out. Violet's voice sounded like a gentle stream flowing in the night, the time when the water looks like black velvet. They had read a play in ninth-grade drama class where one character said, "The river is soft." That is what Mandy was thinking about as Violet held out the knife to Mandy. She didn't want to do it. She desperately didn't want to do it, but she felt so frozen. For years she had trusted Violet. She loved her. Where had her best friend gone? All Mandy wanted to do was for this to be over, and for the real Violet to come back, not this evil presence. Do it, Mandy, Violet whispered. The deer can't run. It can't do anything. Do it. One strike, and you can end it. Mandy felt so frozen. She wanted to jump up and run, but her feet were planted. I do it, Mandy, Violet kept saying. Just put the knife in and out, next across its throat. Then it's all over. I can't, Mandy started to cry. You can, Mandy, Violet pleaded. I believe in you. No one else ever believed in you, but I did. I do now. Mandy felt as if there were a weak hand pulling the knife, trying to take it away from her, but that imaginary force was simply not strong enough. She got down on her knees. She looked at the injured deer's eyes for a second, but she turned away. Good girl, Violet hummed. That's it, Mandy. Put it out of its misery. You'll be a hero. You'll truly be my best friend. You always were. I would do it for you. Frozen. That was the only word Mandy could think about. She felt frozen. She wanted to run. She wanted to say no, but she couldn't. She didn't. Mandy closed her eyes. She began to cry harder. Tears started pouring down her cheeks. She held the knife up and plunged it into the deer's defenseless body. The little deer let out a whelp of pain, and Mandy collapsed. I, she shrieked, I'm so sorry. Why did you tell me to do this? Who are you? You're not Violet. What is wrong with you? Violet knelt down next to Mandy. It was as if Mandy's screaming and the deer's whelping had no effect on her. Violet poked her index finger from her left hand into the wound that Mandy had created. Even though the deer was wincing, Violet was not discouraged. She removed a single bloody finger and ran it across Mandy's cheek, dragging it from her earlobe to her lips. You dumb bitch, Violet said, in the most lifeless voice ever. It's not even dead. You are not Violet. You are evil, Mandy shouted. Then she took the knife and drove it into Violet's midsection. The fear in Violet's eyes was something that Mandy had never seen before. Surprise, shock, and pure terror. Mandy pulled the knife out, and Violet immediately grabbed the wound on her stomach. Mandy dropped the golden-brown knife, scrambled away, and kept running. She would not stop. Chapter 5. Is that for real? Darryl muttered. Yes, Mandy replied without hesitation. So that's what happened, he begged for clarification. I already said yes, Mandy restated. You don't believe me, do you? Darryl looked down at the brown liquid in his white styrofoam cup with the ridges on the side. Then he set the cup down, and he stood up and looked at the melange of colors on the motel curtains. The dim white and yellow lights hid most of his facial expressions. "Are you telling me the truth?" he said again. "Oh my God, Daryl," she blurted out. "That's the third time you have said that, yes." "I don't believe you, Mandy," Daryl retorted. You're telling me that you killed your best friend because she was mean to you for a week and she asked you to kill an injured deer? So you wanted to bring justice to the world by murdering her? No way. Good story. Oh, actually, that's a bad story, but what are you telling me this for?" "Believe what you want, I guess," Mandy murmured. "But why do you think I'm out here? Why do you think you found me wandering in the desert? Do you think I like the outdoors and sleeping on the sand at night? Do you think I just love having my hair feel like a giant pile of crust?" Daryl walked back toward Mandy. She could tell that he was in a rather tense mood. He knelt down for a second to pick up the styrofoam cup filled with coffee. He brought his lips to the cup and took something in between a sip and a gulp. "If you see anything on the TV about me," she started, "don't say I didn't tell you first. You ask all the wrong questions, Amanda," Daryl shot back. His expression was blank. Daryl walked back toward Mandy. She could tell that he was in a tense mood. He knelt down for a second to pick up the styrofoam cup filled with coffee. He brought his lips to the cup and took something in, between a sip and a gulp. "If you see anything on the TV about me," she started, "don't say I didn't tell you anything first. You ask all the wrong questions, Amanda," Daryl shot back. His expression was blank, and his eyes looked as if the life had been sucked out of them. It almost looked like he was staring at a blank wall the way he looked at her. "What do you mean?" she asked. "You just asked me, why do I think you're out here?" Daryl repeated. "Why do I think I found you wandering the desert?" "Yeah," Mandy puffed. Daryl drank the rest of his coffee in the cup and tossed it to the side, not landing anywhere near the wastebasket. "Well, Amanda, why do you think I found you? Why do you think I was out in the desert? You said it yourself, I'm a diesel mechanic, but I don't drive a diesel truck. What could be going on? What on earth?" Mandy's eyes grew wide. If Daryl's were blank, hers were filled with fire. "Daryl," she said, "you're scaring me." Daryl walked over to the small bag that he had brought into the motel room, which had been placed on the chair by the round motel table. He didn't look back at Mandy as he reached in and removed a small handgun. Mandy had seen similar guns on television, but she didn't know what kind it was. She had once seen a movie where they talked about owning a 9mm pistol, and it looked like the gun from the film, but she wasn't sure. Daryl raised the gun and pointed it directly at Mandy. She sat on the motel floor, and her lips began to tremble. "If you even try to scream, I will shoot off your entire jaw. Then you won't be able to scream anymore," he threatened her. I... She kept whispering. "Shut up," Daryl whispered back. "What do you want me to do?" Mandy shrieked in a muffled voice. She didn't want him to see, but once the barrel of the gun was pointed in her direction, she felt petrified. The intensity of the situation was something that she could not have anticipated. "Get up," Daryl ordered. He took a step back to make sure the space in the motel had room for him and Mandy to walk. "Okay," she obeyed. "Now turn around," Daryl ordered. "Daryl, please, I don't want to, she pleaded. After hearing the first sound of disobedience, Daryl struck her in the side of the head with the pistol, and Mandy fell on the bed. The tears began to pour down her face. The only word she could think of was nightmare. What was she going to do? She wanted to feel her forehead to see if there was blood, but she felt paralyzed. Daryl raised the barrel of the gun again. "Do what I say," he commanded in a lifeless voice. Mandy didn't say a word. Instead, she nodded in agreement. Daryl kept the gun pointed at her. Then he returned to his bag and removed a single red rope. It looked like the kind that Mandy had seen at the hardware stores when she was a kid with her dad. Kids always paid more attention to those types of details, the red rope and the green rope and such. She would give anything to go back in time and be that little girl again. She would give anything to be that girl who would walk with her parents and not feel the miseries of the outer world bearing down on her, to be the girl that got fascinated by color when she was waiting for someone else, the girl who stared at a menu sign in a cafe and wondered how espresso might taste, the girl who had a best friend and that wonderful white bandana that she loved so much. Daryl struck Mandy again in the head. She didn't scream. He pounced on top of her and began to wrap the rope around her hands. It seemed so effortless, but Daryl then forced her arms behind her back and tied them in a complicated knot. He did the same thing to her ankles. Mandy rested there, hog-tied. "Are you going to kill me?" she said, in the softest voice. "Yeah," Daryl answered. "So after all this, you're really a serial killer?" she questioned him. "I wouldn't use that term." Daryl almost chuckled, in mockery of Mandy's previous comments. "Please don't do this," Mandy begged, without real emotion. She had stopped crying moments ago. "People always say the same thing," Daryl shrugged it off. "You're not going to shoot me," Mandy predicted. "Oh," Daryl snickered. "Someone will hear the gunshot," she reasoned. "That's true." Daryl reached into the front pocket of his blue jeans and pulled out a folding knife. It was almost like the one from Mandy's story, except it was all black, and it had a grooved pattern. "It'll all be over in a little," Daryl reassured her. "Then I'm going to stab you in the throat and drag the knife along your neck, and you'll bleed out before you know it. If you had done that to that poor little imaginary deer, it would have died sooner." "Why are you doing this?" Mandy asked. "Because I'm not a little bitch," Daryl hissed back. For the first time since meeting him, Mandy saw Daryl show a speck of rage. "You're about to stab a girl who is tied up and can't fight back?" Mandy debated him. "You are a coward." Daryl drove the knife toward Mandy's shoulder and put his hand over her mouth to hide her shrieks. It turned out that he didn't cut her. It had merely been a threat, and he held the knife back before he drew blood. Mandy could see Daryl smile in a gentle way when he regained control of the situation. "You call me a coward," he spoke in a confident way, "but I'm not afraid to kill you right now. You couldn't do that. Tell me, Amanda, what really happened to Violet?" Mandy bit her lip. I didn't kill her," Mandy confessed. "No?" Daryl mocked her. "Of course not. You don't have it in you. What really happened?" Mandy didn't want to say, but Daryl stood over her with a knife and a gun. She knew from the blank look in his eyes that this was not a ruse. He was going to stab her. "Her father molested me," Mandy confessed. As the words fell from her lips, more tears began to pour down her face. She had wanted to tell someone the truth for so long, but she did not expect that it would be Daryl. He was a twisted and deranged man, and he stood above her with a knife and a handgun, waiting to give her a fatal injury at any moment, yet she still felt the release of emotion as the tears poured down. All Mandy could think about was the tears, the feeling in her eyes. Part of her felt good to say the truth for once. The other part of her felt pain, misery, and rage. The truth of what had happened to her now surfaced. "I didn't kill Violet," she confessed again. "I made up that whole story. I made it up. I told it to myself over and over again. Violet knew. She knew. She knew what her dad had done to me, and she was going to turn a blind eye to it. She was going to turn a blind eye to it. She's still doing it now. She's going to continue her life in Reno, but I can't. I couldn't pretend that nothing happened. It didn't happen to her. It happened to me. For days now I've been telling myself something different. I told myself that I killed Violet. I wanted to believe something else. I wanted to believe that Violet had been possessed by the evil. I know what happened. You were right, Daryl. You saw through it all. I didn't kill her. There was no bleeding deer. The story worked in my mind, but it didn't work when I said it out loud. You knew the whole time. I just told myself over and over again because I didn't want to think about the truth. People are evil, Daryl began. All of us. Instead of playing the victim, you'd rather tell me that you were a murderer? Perhaps you were even more twisted than I am. I didn't want him to, Mandy cried. I didn't want all that talk about being frozen with fear. That was all true. Why didn't I do something? Why did I just sit there and let that man do that to me? Did you stab Violet's father? Daryl asked. You said you stabbed Violet. Did you do that to her dad? No, of course not, Mandy grunted. I didn't do anything. Why didn't I do something? He did it to me. I felt blank. The whole time he was touching me. Why didn't I? Violet was in the next room. She knew it was happening. Why didn't she do anything either? Once it was over, I ran. I had this white bandana, and I was so ashamed of myself that I burned it. Then I left town. That's when I ran. I've been running for days. You'll never outrun it, Daryl warned her. What do you mean? Daryl bit his lower lip. He dropped the gun downward in a slow and cautious manner. Mandy looked into his eyes, and she couldn't see the rage any more. She saw a giant question mark looking back at her. It was my mother, said Daryl. Your mother? Mandy asked. What do you mean? The heaviness of her tears had subsided for a moment. She's the one who did it to me. Daryl gave his own confession. Your mother did... Shut up! Daryl shouted. Do not even say that again, or I will kill you now. Do you hear me, Amanda? You're gonna kill me anyway, Mandy murmured. I mean, right? Daryl's brief moment of humanity was over. He took the barrel of the gun and pressed it against the side of Mandy's head, right on her temple. Mandy's tears had returned, this time for nervousness. Nothing could have prepared her for the intensity of this experience. Daryl pulled the gun away for a second. He had the knife in his other hand, but he wasn't clutching it tightly anymore. It was like he was a limp carrot that had come out of the steamer. What? Mandy inquired. What did you do to me? Daryl asked back. I gave you poison, Mandy admitted. I put it in the coffee cup when you were not looking. No, Daryl said softly. It's over, Daryl. She almost coughed. It's all over now. Mandy was still bound by the red rope restraints. She could not free herself if she wanted. So Daryl sat on the edge of the motel bed. He looked down at the floor. Mandy thought for a second that he was about to cry, like she had just done a minute ago. But he didn't. He just stared at the floor. The knife and gun were in his hands, but the fear was beginning to subside. What was in that drink? Daryl asked. I don't even know how to pronounce it, Mandy answered honestly. I read about it on the internet. I was going to use it on Violet's father, but I didn't. I ended up using it on you. I knew you were dangerous. I didn't know like this, but I knew you were going to do something. You seemed so harmless. Too safe to be true. So that's it, huh? Daryl muttered in a blank way. He started breathing heavier and heavier, but for the most part he remained composed, except for the terror and sadness in his eyes. Mandy looked at Daryl, and she knew. He was aware of everything that was happening, and he was going to die. Did you kill other women? Mandy asked. Daryl paused. Yes, he acknowledged. Were you really going to kill me? Yes, he said again. And to be honest, Mandy, I would have enjoyed it. I was going to stab you here, wrap your body up in these sheets, and dump you in a hole in the desert. Next I would have shot your body, just for fun. No one would ever have found you. I learned what kind of sheets this motel has. I have a fresh set out in the truck. I could have killed you and made a neat bed. Of course, ruffle the sheets a little bit so it looked normal. Then I would burn those bloody sheets. I mean, I would have... That sounds like a story I would have made up, said Mandy, as she remembered the white bandana. Darryl began to laugh in a gentle way. Mandy was bothered by it, but she didn't let it show. "I feel warm," Darryl began. "Too warm." "Darryl," said Mandy. "What?" he asked in the same gentle voice. "Let me go," she responded. "Please." "No," he returned. I don't know what you did, or I know what you did, but I don't know what you put in my coffee." Oh, it sounds so silly when I say it like that. I don't want to die sounding silly. I know it's over, Mandy. It's over. I'm going to die. I know it's for real. He raised the gun again and pointed the barrel toward Mandy. "Darryl," she said in a confident voice, "please let me go." "Why?" he asked. "You are the one who killed me." "Because you were going to kill me," she debated him. "But you didn't know that yet," Darryl argued. "You gave it away with your words," said Mandy. "I knew something was going to happen." "You told me you killed Violet," he challenged her. "That wasn't true. Maybe your idea or whatever you thought about my words wasn't true either." "But your story is true," she said. "You did all of those things. How many women did you do this to?" Darryl dropped the gun and looked at the floor. 5, he answered. "You were going to be number 6. "Darryl, please let me go," she begged. Darryl's eyes were gazing at the dingy motel room and not at Mandy, but he turned to look at her. He didn't say a word. Instead, he put the gun on the motel bed. He walked toward Mandy. His hands were shaking because he was so nervous, or maybe the poison was kicking in already. Mandy figured it was both. "Darryl, please let me go," she kept saying. Darryl was now puffing air out of his mouth. He wasn't quite hyperventilating, but his body could almost not stand any more pain. Darryl looked down at Mandy on the bed with the red ties around her arms and legs. His hands reached for them. He didn't need to cut the restraints. He merely pulled on them in a certain way, and Mandy felt her arms loosen. Next her legs came free. Mandy sprang to her feet, and she looked Darryl in the eye for a split second. Then Darryl fell down on the motel bedspread. He grabbed his chest, and then he grabbed his head. Mandy could tell that he didn't know what would alleviate the feeling. The whole time she stared at him with a blank expression. He moved his body onto his back. Darryl looked back at Mandy, his eyes opening and closing in a constant manner. "It's over," he said. "Not quite," Mandy mouthed. "Are you going to torture me?" Darryl asked. Mandy almost laughed. She hid her laugh, but she couldn't hide the thin smile on her lips. The thought of it was comical. "No," she replied. "You were evil, Darryl. But I don't think this is our only story. In a different world, in a different universe somewhere, you and I were stargazing lovers. Do you feel it?" "I do, Mandy," he said back. "I don't know how, but I do." "In another life, perhaps you and I are out in the desert. We're looking up at the stars, and we're sharing the stories of our lives. We tell each other that we've been through things, and we wonder how the world could be so cruel." "I wish that were real," Darryl uttered faintly. "Maybe it happened one time," said Mandy. "I don't know why, Darryl, but I think even in that world we are still running. At least I am." "Why not me?" he wheezed. "In a more perfect world, Darryl is the strong one," Mandy explained. Darryl exhaled some warm air, but Mandy could see he was cracking a smile. "I'm gonna die, Mandy," he repeated. "Well, we don't live in that perfect world yet," she stated, "and you are not that guy. You did horrible things to those people." "Horrible things were done to me," he coughed. Darryl's body was almost paralyzed, and he was fighting to keep his eyes open. "That was no excuse," Mandy reasoned. "Not an excuse. A reason," Darryl attempted to clarify. "A selfish and cowardly reason," she responded. "You became the evil." Darryl was about to say goodbye to his life. He was hanging on by a thread. "Remember that better version of me, Mandy," he gave his last words. "Even if It is only a fantasy. Then he closed his eyes, and he could see no more. Mandy stood looking down at Daryl's lifeless body. You didn't say please, Mandy spoke to the corpse. I wish I could remember you as a guy who gave me a ride in the desert. But you had your last words. You didn't say sorry. You didn't say you were wrong. No regrets, no remorse. That's what I'll remember, Daryl. If only things could have been different. Mandy began to move around the motel room. She began to pile her belongings and anything Daryl may have touched and collected them together. She took a white tissue and began to wipe down the hard surfaces in the motel with water. She wasn't even sure if tissue paper would remove fingerprints, but she decided to try anyway. The last item Mandy had to take was Daryl's set of keys. She looked at him one last time, and she began to wonder what someone would think once they found him. She shuddered, but she knew it was time to leave. She pried the door open with her fingernail and then her elbow, and she carried the bundle out to Daryl's small pickup truck. She tossed the clutter into the bed and looked to see if anyone was watching. Not a soul was in sight at the lonely Miner's Edge Motel. Mandy moved to the cab of the truck. She got behind the wheel and put the keys in the ignition. As she put the truck in reverse and pulled out of the parking space, she didn't look back. Daryl was gone, but she remained. Her foot hit the brake as she was about to exit the motel parking lot. A sudden thought came over her. Where should she go? Down south to Mexico? Back home to Reno? Maybe a quick tour in Las Vegas? The open road shall decide, she said to herself. Then she drove off into the night.